Hello, everybody, and welcome to this conversation, Art and the New Normal, with me, Louisa and Gavin Turk. And first of all, we're going to kick off with art and the new normal. Well, it's not going to be just art, it's going to be art, the art world, the world that we all inhabit. And also, what the hell is the new normal? I mean, we're talking about this phrase has been bandied around ever since lockdown, ever since the pandemic first kicked in the UK. I'm rather thinking that we're living this new normal because it's just like we're just making it up as we go along day by day. But then also there's this talk about the new normal at some unspecified time when we're all going to go back to what is the new normal, but what will that be? So I think we're talking about the here and now, and we're talking about the future. Gavin, what's your new normal been like just over the past couple of months? I mean, how much has the coronavirus and lockdown affected your daily life, disrupted your daily life and the way you work?
Well, I've been lucky enough that because I live quite close to my studio, I've been able to kind of go backwards and forwards from my home to my studio. So in that respect, it's been kind of like normal. But actually, I work with lots of other people in my studio, and they're not here. So I'm kind of here on my own, and I feel like my whole process has actually changed. My whole kind of outlook has changed, and I've obviously found myself diving into the computer a lot and going to look at the computer for dialogue, for communication, for news, for, in a way, there is a bit of a feeling of being in a bubble, and then there's this kind of curious sense. I mean, I've spoken to lots of artists who've all sort of said, "Oh, well, this is fine. This is my normal. I'm just here on my own, doing my own thing, and that's really normal for me." But I think that somehow for me, there is this kind of curious thing, which is that actually I think that I need an object, and maybe this is a really old-fashioned thing, but I think about objects, and I need to experience objects, and everything's becoming very subjective, and it's all becoming very kind of articulated through the medium of the computer. I had a studio exhibition.
Your exhibition over Easter, yeah.
Exhibition over Easter.
Or your egg-related works, yeah.
But in a way, this was kind of produced by the idea that I kept getting invitations to exhibitions at MoMA and various kind of important national museums whose shows had been cancelled, and instead of stopping altogether, what they were doing was they were having their opening and having their art like online. So I thought, well, online, like my art in my studio online is almost the same as this other exhibition. So suddenly I created an exhibition, and normally I wouldn't have an exhibition. I normally have to work through a gallery or be in a gallery to do that. So it was a sort of almost like a sleight of hand somehow. It felt like a kind of sliding together of certain kind of not the usual, but it's odd, like coming back to this idea of what is normal.
But there was this, yeah, I mean, we all spend lots of time on our screens, and I think it's quite interesting to talk about, the great pause. Well, I don't know about you, but my life hasn't been paused at all. It's been absolutely frenetic because I've been keeping a household together with lots of people in it, also working from home. The art newspaper, actually, of course, everything went online. We still produce a monthly analog paper, but they wanted the dreaded C word, content. Only next to webinar is the word content do I hate more, practically. The idea that suddenly there was this migration online. Everyone was putting stuff out online, and frankly, it was overwhelming. And I think it's a very odd way to experience art. I mean, I enjoyed your exhibition because it was nice to see you, and I hadn't seen you for ages, but it was a difficult way to experience work. You make the most beautiful analog physical objects, which actually merit close scrutiny. And I think this is a problem for art. You're also a very sociable artist, however, and you use the internet a lot, and you use Instagram a lot, and you always, you know, you've had a very conspicuous presence in a way online since the lockdown, with the exhibition, doing a Saatchi tutorial of making Albert's cutouts. So again, it was the analog and the physical. So you've got this sort of funny push me pull you between the social space, albeit mediated by a screen, and the physical space, which is completely denied to all of us to experience you and your work.
I mean, I have found myself concentrating much more on the Instagram account, and you know, it's like, it seems like a kind of annoying, there's something annoying about this kind of watching the followers or trying to see how many people like something, or it's a very kind of turgid way of understanding an experience relationship between an audience and something that you're doing. I mean, it's very actual. I mean, you can sort of, suddenly you can see that, you know, another 200 followers have started like following your Instagram site, and so you go, oh, you know, maybe, you know, whatever that was that I did, and I'm not quite sure what it was, but maybe what I need to do is do something like that again. I mean, it's a terrible trap though as well, because it means you're sometimes concentrating on the wrong things.
But then you've also seemed to me, you've used Instagram as a kind of notebook almost. I've seen images like squashed images, palimpsests, things that you see in the street. This seems to be a change in your way of working, and it seems that quite a few artists have done this, where their Instagram feed has become a bit like a notebook. It's a way for, you know, yes, artists say they like being quiet in their studios and contemplating, but also art is about communication as well. Again, there's this sort of dichotomy, and it seems that you've actually upped that side of things. I mean, do you feel that you have changed the way that you've been thinking about your work? You've been resurrecting older works, the epic reappearance of the toilet roll, when there was the mad toilet roll gate in all the supermarkets just before lockdown, and you resurrected this and did a whole lovely spoof about all that online, and it was very topical and funny, but it was an old piece. So you're repurposing works, and also, are you thinking about making new works? I'm just curious, before we broaden it out a bit, just about you as an artist, and what's the new normal, what's you making art at the moment? Are you responding to the current situation? How are you sort of adjusting your practice?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Instagram thing, I don't really think is per se a space for just showing my art. You know, I think it's a space for sharing more of the context. So I think I'm trying to kind of, I think I'm trying to put forward things that I wouldn't necessarily show. I wouldn't necessarily put in an exhibition. They don't really hold up in an exhibition, but maybe they hold up as just something that kind of makes you think, and that sort of turns over a thought, and kind of, it maybe starts to articulate a different way of looking at things. And I think that, you know, I think there is this sort of strange, we are in this strange moment where this sort of Damocles thing is hanging over our heads, and we're not really sure how we're supposed to be behaving. Like we're not quite sure. Like, I mean, there's this idea of social distancing, and I kind of, I sort of started thinking, well, maybe it's not social distancing; it's just physical distancing. We need to kind of keep the social cohesion. And I mean, obviously, I'm really enjoying the kind of the bounce back of nature, the sort of spring effect. You know, the lack of aeroplanes in the sky is amazing. It's incredible. And I mean, to be honest, it has kind of meant that certain things have caught up with me. And as much as, like, at the beginning of the year before last, I was arrested for the it was November last year, wasn't it? Time has gone all strange.
Normal. Time
Yeah.
has different meaning.
but you know, and since then I haven't I've only travelled on land to do a show in Amsterdam, but I haven't really been I didn't manage to make it to Venice. I didn't travel anywhere, and I realized, like, and I'm looking at photographs on my desktop, and I'm realizing, like, how many exhibitions I'm doing internationally, and how much my photographic album is pictures of shots of different countries, and how much traveling was involved in being an artist, and how that kind of cultural exchange, where it was going and how it was functioning, is really important to the idea of art. You know, at one point, like, my main market, sorry to use that horrible word, but my main market was in America. But I haven't been or had an exhibition or done really anything in America for a long time now. And
You've made a
even
decision.
telephone calls are difficult.
You've made a decision not to fly, though, haven't you? I mean, you made that before COVID, before the
I'm
pandemic.
trying, yeah. I mean, this is the thing. I'm trying to not fly if I can, or I'm building up. In theory, I'm building up my air miles by not flying, so that if I would do, it would only be in an emergency. Sorry.
But I do think, well, this kind of brings it on. I mean, I was going to talk a little bit more about artists working with the situation, just before we go on to, because I want to talk about the art market, how the art market is coping now and dealing with it, how we see the art market playing out. Will there be changes in the way the market conducts itself? Surely there has to be, with the pulling back of travel, art fairs being cancelled, whole new modes of art dealing is taking place. But it does seem to me, whether it's about artists making work for social distancing, whether it's about Peter Liversidge putting a fleet of signs up every night for the last nearly 2 months on a street corner in support of the NHS, whether it's about Stefan Brueggemann getting the only permitted industry at the moment working construction to gild the front of a house and then spray paint OK across the front in a kind of ambiguous way to make analog public works, or whether it's about artists using the internet and using virtual reality in an interesting way, like Li Ming Wei getting kind of you could book, actually you still can, individual recitals. One opera singer will make a Zoom call to you and sing you an aria for 4 minutes, just you. It's absolutely magical. That's using the internet in an interesting way. So you've got this playing with backwards and forwards. You've got this kind of travel in a way that travel really, you know, was almost impossible. Peter Liversidge's very local project went viral globally in a way that it never would have done pre-pandemic. So you've got this strange kind of, you know, virtual travel while analog travel is stopping, and artists on the other hand are making analog work, sometimes in opposition to this kind of sense of everything being online. I mean, I don't know how you're negotiating. Are you making physical work at the moment as well? I mean, have you got?
Yeah, I am. I am. I mean, again, I've kind of used the time to sort of try and tidy up as well, and try and sort of try and deal with a lot of older work that I've had knocking around, and I've tried to kind of organize my my storage. But I am also making newer work. I'm making some paintings, which is quite odd. It's very kind of old school. I always kind of hate these kind of like the return to painting, which happens on a sort of like every 5 years, the return to painting. I think possibly that there's a sort of, there's this sort of sense of eking stuff out. I have also been finding things around and about, like picking things up off the street, and also maybe finding things in my old work and sort of trying to look at how I could recycle that, or how I could work with that. So it's really about kind of eking it out, how to be kind of, how to be really generous with thoughts and ideas, and to make sort of rounded and robust and powerful work, whatever that is, but try and use like limited resources to try and sort of like be as kind of economic with the resources as possible.
I mean, I did an interview with Marina Abramovich a while back, and she said, you know, it's dangerous for artists when the events of the day change their work. Yeah. I don't agree. Did you agree with that? I mean,
well, you know, like there is this thing about artists being reactionary, and you know, like the events of the day do change artists' work, because artists' work just goes into the kind of into the into the world, we'll call it the world. And then the events of the world, like, position people in the places where they will stand to look at the work. So they will read and change and look at the work in different ways. I mean, obviously there is that thing about fashion and you know, artists that rush to be fashionable and can be fashionable for a moment, and then they're the most unfashionable thing very, very quickly. Whatever that is. I mean, you know, there is obviously art which is related and works through processes of sort of gossip and kind of idle chat and chatter and stuff that's a little bit, it does become, you know, there is an element of that with the internet. There is a sort of media clickbait sort of, there is a kind of an element to the Instagram accounts, which are kind of fed by the media. Like the media sort of almost generates a certain kind of thing that's successful or not at a certain point in time.
I think what's interesting too, I mean, let's go on to the market, because, you know, this is what you touched on it before. I mean, obviously galleries, commercial galleries are now reopening, and they will be reopening in a limited way. They've reopened across Europe, albeit with very limited attendance, people being permitted to go in. But I mean, yeah, the market has stopped. Art fairs have been cancelled. You know, jets have been grounded. Even the wealthiest collectors are now confined to their homes. I mean, how do you see this playing out? I mean, I've been quite surprised and pleasantly surprised by a kind of collegiate tendency between gallerists forming, you know, groups, platforms of galleries of all varying sizes, larger galleries welcoming smaller galleries onto their websites. You could argue that it's a way to get, you know, exciting young talent onto your website to attract your collectors. But, you know, nonetheless, it's still good to give galleries who don't have those kind of digital resources a platform. WhatsApp groups between London dealers who would not normally have had any contact with each other beyond, you know, glowering across the aisles of an art fair. I mean, I think it's interesting that there is a sort of collegial basis. But how do you see the market playing out? Is there going to be a huge shift? There has to be, surely.
I mean, obviously when I think about what happens in a museum and the way that museums work, like it seems that museums are like, they need to rely on these blockbuster exhibitions every now and again just to kind of keep themselves rolling along. Otherwise, they seem to be having like some financial issues. And the trouble when a museum has financial issues, it starts to become a little bit controlled by collectors and patron clubs and basically people who already have vested interests in certain kinds of art and certain kinds of messaging. And so the museums can kind of a little bit disappear, I think, in difficult times. And obviously, like how we have a blockbuster exhibition now, I really don't know. I guess you just have it with fewer people. I mean, I think that, you know, the big problem is we just don't want to make sure that the kind of elite element, and obviously galleries, you know, like they probably do function in a very elite way, and it, you know, possibly doesn't matter. But I think when we go to our national public institutions, it's important that those institutions represent, you know, a kind of a wide and an open, like an open platform for.
I mean, the institutions are realizing increasingly that even now that they're shuttered, even that they have to be relevant to their local communities. There's a sense of, I mean, I saw an interview with Anne Pasternak just recently from the Brooklyn Museum saying, you know, she sees the Brooklyn Museum as an anchor to the local community, not just with its collection, but also the public spaces around a museum. And I think Tate is also trying very hard. It's displayed messages for key workers. They've given equipment to PPE to hospitals. And there's a sense of trying to engage, and on the whole environmental aspect, which I think is really crucial, that institutions do now seem to be waking up to the fact that they do have a remit to be environmentally aware, to lead in the environmental field in a way. And also, I think the gallerists as well. I think, you know, I think there's an increasing awareness that we are inhabiting this planet. That there is a sense of trying to make a provision for actually regarding other populations apart from the direct art world, because we all inhabit the world, which is under severe crisis. I mean, culture declares climate emergency. I think it's only a year and a bit old, but it's been, Tate has declared a climate emergency, and they genuinely are trying to grapple with this. And you know this because you're also working on a personal level, and indeed got arrested for doing so as well. I think it is interesting. This shift does seem to be a paradigm shift, which I hope. Do you think this will endure after the lockdown?
I think it'll get more. I mean, I think that there's definitely a message which, certainly from my experience in the art world, it's a message that lots of people are interested more and more in finding out about and understanding and knowing about. I think, there's a disconnect between the politicians and the government and policy so far. There's a little bit of a disconnect, and yet I think if you were to ask parliamentarians personally, they would all say that they're for environmental ecological change, but it just doesn't seem to it hasn't quite started getting itself onto the agenda. And and I think there is a kind of a strange sense of, we're still all searching for truth. I mean, that the art world is in lots of ways is quite a good place to try to think about truth. I mean, it makes pictures and illusions and images, but in actual fact, those images, pictures and illusions are, the purpose of those things is to bring you into a kind of connection, into contact with reality of sorts, or a kind of a truth. And I mean, maybe it's a truth that's found through storytelling, but it's still nonetheless a sort of truth. And I think that I started doing these drawings one a day, and I called them cave drawings. And it was very much like trying, I found myself sort of almost like holed up, sort of thinking or trying to think about how I could make drawings which had no subject per se, make drawings which were sort of made by themselves, almost like a sort of a dream, like the way that the drawing would kind of make itself just through me being in the presence of the piece of paper and having a pencil in my hand. And somehow there's that sort of, for me, it felt like this removal of it felt like a kind of it was possible to do this through the removal of context. And I just when suddenly, I don't think it will be sudden. That's the other thing. I think this whole process is going to be quite slow in kind of coming round to something where we're not just trapped in our houses. Yeah, I mean, I hope that there is a learning, and that there are things there is a kind of a paradigm shift that's taken place in this period, some of which, and hopefully we can separate the good things from the bad things, some of which will be useful to take on from this moment.
There is this sense, that a crisis foregrounds existing problems. Crises bring these things. It draws out the existing problems, and one of this has obviously been an environmental one, which has been huge for a long time. And pre-COVID, there have been conversations with Culture Declares across the board about how can museums, institutions be more relevant, and be more relevant to populations that aren't just the human population, which is a very interesting idea that's been introduced, that actually, a museum and a gallery, it's now accepted they're not just these elite kind of, custodial palaces of treasured objects. They're also places that actually have to have an active engagement with their collections. And I think what will be interesting, because blockbusters won't be tenable, I think they will still exist because they're needed for revenue streams, but they will happen in a very different way, less frequently, and there'll be much more of a return to the actual collections that these museums own, a lot of them which were produced under very dubious circumstances, colonial, racially problematic, all kinds of hideous kind of backgrounds, but they will now be foregrounded, so these pasts and our the cultural past and the strands of culture will be able to be engaged with, and I think in hopefully a different way now, with a sense that there are other communities apart from the elitist community that's dominated the art world, and there are populations that have to be catered for, ethnically, racially, sexually, identity, gender diverse, and indeed non-human as well. So there's a sense of dealing with the environmental, the ecological populations too. I love the idea that's been posited about board meetings of institutions having an empty chair for the non-human population, for the animals, for the plants, for the planet, and that sits there at the board meetings and is a kind of presence, which is a kind of very potent symbol, I think. And so I'm kind of optimistic that as museums and galleries have to return to their collections what they actually own and look at what that means and what those histories were, other histories I think will perforce now be introduced. Other racial histories, other identities, other histories will come forward. I'm not saying this is all COVID induced, but I think this pause for reflection and the economical strictures of not being able to bang out another huge blockbuster to bring in the crowds constantly will bring about, I hope, this way of thinking. Maybe this is a utopian rant, but I feel kind of cautiously optimistic, although there's going to be a lot of unpleasant fallout as well, of course. I mean, in huge degree, just by sheer loss of life and loss of liberty that we're going to have.
Yeah.
But
no, I'm as I'm hearing you, I am thinking really about like where my work is going, and into the future. That I have some designs for some large bronze sculptures, and I'm it's suddenly it's quite you suddenly think to yourself, this is quite a commitment of energy and material. So you really have to see it in the context of what will it actually add. If you're not part of the solution, you shouldn't really be doing it. So obviously I'm having to kind of almost like rev up my own way of thinking, and also like I think the thing about the bronze public sculpture is that it's this idea that it can weather time, that it can stand the test of time. And I think that what the computer or what this current period is doing is it's making us realize how fleeting time is. And I mean, I suppose the notion of history itself, is sort of shifting. I mean, I think, as you were saying, the reinsertion back into art history of female artists, of black artists, of outsider artists, feeding these artists back into looping them back into our history means that history itself is being slightly restructured. Certainly art history is being restructured, and I think it's happening through lots of different histories as well. I mean, you could be looking at books or all sorts of other sorts of histories, cultural histories. And so what we're feeling, I feel that there's this sense that like the idea of things marching on big time into the future isn't quite so, it's not quite so impacting. It's not quite so urgent somehow.
It does seem to be in a kind of, I mean, I take what you say about museums and institutions being elitist, and I think it's an interesting thing when they do reopen, because there's going to be these very strict social distancing rules. And I'm thinking of China, which obviously is not known for its love of civil liberties or indeed human rights, but it is interesting that, the galleries have opened in China, and they've opened because you get temperature tested when you go into the 798 area in Beijing, the whole gallery district. You get temperature tested, then you have to have a special pass, which you get from a government app, which then can track you through your data as to where you've been and whether you've been in any high-risk areas or not. And I think even uses some facial recognition to confirm that. And I mean, that's going to be untenable, untenable to populations across chunks of the world. People are accepting it in China because that's the status quo, and that's the conditions that you have to reach to be able to open your galleries. I'm not suggesting they're going to be doing this kind of to such an extent here, but I do see the problems of civil liberties, the problems of being tracked, of being regulated, and this kind of power grab, if you like, of governments, which worries me about the new normal, that it won't be, on the one hand, happy, clappy and collegiate. There will be the sense of us being very much scrutinized and controlled and observed. But then on the other hand, reciprocally, I see a greater democratization. The fact that, you know, people across the country, just from the UK point of view, but across the world, are making artworks, posting them on the Instagram. This whole artist support pledge policy of Matt Burrows, an artist in in the south of England, who's now generated millions of pounds for fellow artists, for artists selling their work and then buying the work from fellow artists once they make £1,000 from their sales, all on Instagram, a completely different parallel model to the art market. So it's this kind of DIY thing, or you making your drawings every day. So you've got the sort of democratization, but also the fear of it becoming more elite or more controlled. I wonder if you had some thoughts about that kind of two-way stretch.
I mean, I think art, you know, ever since I got involved with something art, which was a little bit of a jump in the first place. I think, you know, I didn't, when I went to study art originally, I didn't really know anything about what I was getting myself into. And I really felt like in quite deep water. And I really felt like my only experience of art was like chocolate boxes, and it was very, very cliched. And in fact, I still work with these things. But it, you know, so it's always, for me, it's always been a sort of struggle, and I've always kind of tried to straddle one foot in and one foot out of what I consider to be like a kind of a functional art world, like or an art world that is open, and that somehow talks to the widest kind of audience. But then at the same time, obviously, you know, like you have to touch down on certain things, and you have to, you know, you do end up making a mark or making a thing, an object, a suggestion, a noise, a sound, an idea, an opinion, whatever it is, that you do end up like formatting yourself, and that is going to place you, and that is going to kind of create you in some respects. So where am I going with all this?
Just about, I mean, I suppose it's about how optimistic. I'm aware that it would be good to open up to questions in a minute or two. So just about whether you're actually optimistic about the sense that there is a kind of a democratization as a result of more communicating, but on the sort of DIY ethos that the internet, that Instagram, these kind of devices, these platforms have helped. But on the other hand, perhaps a slight nervousness that there might be a retrenchment, you know, when shops are opened, the market economy kicks back again, you know, aeroplanes start purring on the runway. I mean, how do we kind of hang on to the positive things that have come out of this hideous pandemic and try and consolidate them and move them forwards, and not just relinquish our civil liberties, relinquish our powers, and become kind of overtaxed wage slaves again, you know, or feeling that the art world has very much kind of restricted, and because obviously there's going to be a huge amount of gallery closures, there's going to be job loss, there's going to be high taxation, a lot of our publicly funded institutions are going to be really struggling. You know, how do we kind of get some positives out of this aspect and perhaps look towards different models, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that you know, that I was kind of suffering slightly from this point, like where it seemed that lots of art was being used and controlled within a financial circuit, where it was just being used as arbitration. It's just being used as financial tools, like quangos of moneyed individuals were just investing in artworks to push it around in the market and make money on it. It was just and unfortunately, this was anything probably in price wise. This was probably anything kind of like above £250,000 sales. all of that stuff was making news. It was making impressions. It was having an effect, and starting to kind of come back and be championed as great art, when in actual fact maybe, you know, some of the more, you know, challenging work and more interesting work was just being swept under the carpet. So I mean, I really hope that you know, like that I guess I just have a kind of a hope, and that's probably just what keeps me going, being an artist. But you know, I have a kind of faith in the idea that that somehow, you know, if you do and you are able to make great art, that you make it, or that I come across it, that I see it, I notice it, that it gets seen.
It's a terminate also, I think, a kind of turning down of the kind of celebrity culture, one hopes, this moving forwards. This might,
it's
in
very
a way, an artwork would become, you know, I always found it really sickening when there was a huge round of applause for some, you know, telephone number million sale of a Picasso, or, you know, even a Peter Doig, or, you know, a record was broken, everybody clapped and cheered, and, you know, the work became this sort of celebrity artwork, and the same thing as a symptom of our celebrity culture. Now all our celebrities, you know, our human celebrities are all behind closed doors with their hair roots growing out, and, you know, the artworks are all shuttered as well, not being able to be kind of scrutinized in this way. So hopefully maybe there might be a kind of deflation of this kind of crazy kind of carousel that there was, I think.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I think that's all correct. Incidentally, I'm just quite enjoying the fact that we're both sat in front of books, talking about computers, sitting in front of books. But a talk I gave at Photo London last year, like with Matthew Collins, was based on the idea that that because everyone has phones now, they take pictures. That actually, like the photograph of the artwork, like, was replacing the artwork. And so again, it was another kind of conversation where the media, and I think this is kind of where I'm trying very hard again to adjust. And there's this idea of people use this word recalibrate. I mean, so this is the thing, isn't it? For artists, like, they've got two choices. Like, one, do they sort of like, do they just bite down on the idea that art is just a fantastic thing and we've just got to, like, you know, do it twice as much? Or do we all kind of like recalibrate our kind of focusing, and do we sort of like try and hone ourselves and change ourselves, modify ourselves, so that we can kind of still function as functional artists in the future? Maybe do both. I don't know.
Well, I think this might be, you know, I think this might be a moment to come over to questions. I'm just looking down at
Do you have some questions? Do you have the question sheet there?
I have the questions that have been typed in. Yes, I've had a whole number of questions, and I'm just going to ask. Well, first of all, a question from Julia saying, how do you estimate the re-evaluation of the present art from the last 20 years to be in view of this unprecedented crisis? So how will art now be re-evaluated in view of the present of this crisis? How will we look at art through the filter of the crisis? Will it change?
I'm not sure. How do I do it? How will I look at art?
How do we estimate the re-evaluation? It says here. How do you estimate the re-evaluation of the present art / last 20 years to be in view of this unprecedented crisis? So I guess how do we look at things, art being made now, in this view, and over the last 20 years?
I mean, you know, I think probably we will look at art slightly differently. You know, I think that there is a point where everybody's been brought into a kind of strange shift in their relationship to their safety or their social space, you know, where they are where were you at the time when you got shut down? You know, some people are, you know, like, I have a friend, Jerry, who is stuck in India, he just went to India like at just the wrong moment, and he's still there. I mean, he would have been back like a month ago, and so it was quite unexpected, like for him, and also like it's quite unexpected for me that suddenly he's not there, and things like that like have a sort of a ricochet or a knock-on effect. And they do sort of, I think they sort of slightly change your perception. They slightly change your mind a little bit. They turn your mind around a bit. I mean, I think that hopefully the lesson is that, we have to really try to come into consciousness of the now and of our being. As much as anything, we want to, going forward, assess art for how it can be useful for us or helpful for us or part of a conversation that we want to have. That there's a sort of, that the discourse or the conversation around art or does this art help me to have the conversation I want to have going on into the future? I suppose the usefulness of art.
I do think it is through this filter. Suddenly Joseph Beuys's 7,000 Oak Trees seem incredibly relevant.
Yeah.
And perhaps some of the more spangly kind of Jeff Koons-ish aspects of the recent madness of the art world do look now like very much a relic from a previous time, that doesn't have a relevance. I think it will filter, it will change our view. Okay, another question coming up here. Talking about art being given away for free. So much art has been given away for free, says Tony. So much art has been given away for free now. How do you think that will change expectations?
I mean, the expectation is, unfortunately, that artists are brilliant for taxing art off, which can be sold in charity sales. In some ways, I find it amazing and brilliant that I can give something that's like really costs me very little, and it can raise consciousness and money for various charities. And so I think there's definitely a positive element to it, but I want, like at the moment there seems to be like a kind of whole plethora, influx of invitations to donate works to raise money for NHS charities, which is all well and good, but I'm kind of, part of me's thinking, hang on a minute, we're raising millions, billions of pounds for NHS charities. This isn't quite the NHS, and it's not quite what,
well, it's not funding the NHS.
What's going on? Why are the artists propping up, and why are people who are buying the art propping up this stuff? I don't know. I mean, like, again, I think we have to, as much as anything, it's all about trying to stay conscious, be conscious, trying to understand, what is the money for? What is the money going to? And again, like when we have collectors, when we have wealthy collectors, how did this money arrive here? How did the money that bought this artwork, how did it get here? What is the sources? I mean, really, like, if we're going to have like a Green New Deal, if we're going to have a new kind of if we're going to have a new political system, we have to have transparency. We have to have, we have to have a financial system which works for people, not just for the 1%.
I think this is the thing. I mean, the art world is the world as well, I mean, the art world inhabits the world, and the real world has to have some dramatic changes from the value systems that have been operating, that are shown in all their erroneousness. Now, another question, this is from Liverpool Arts Lab, saying, he first got to know you, Gavin, through the Art Car Boot Fair. And the Art Car Boot Fair, as we know, is a democratised, interesting collection of contemporary art. I've bought many things myself from the Art Car Boot Fair. What thoughts do you have about opening the art market to a new generation under the proposed new normal? And this is about new models of people buying art, collecting art. I mean, it seems to me that this has already happened to an extent, with artists selling their work on Instagram with new initiatives.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really good. I think it's really important. I think that lots of different ways of art being available, I think is all valuable.
And I think this is something that has actually come out. You know, I keep banging on about artist support pledge. There are other initiatives as well, but this was, you know, instigated by artists for artists with no middleman, no middle people whatsoever, just money going from artist to artist, which I think is a really key thing.
I've been asked also to design various face masks.
Yeah.
And I haven't quite. I mean, I've seen some other ones. There's one by Yinka Shonibare and one by
David one,
like Linda. There was the Contemporary Art Society released some. There's been quite a few artists commissions for artist face masks. It's kind of a tough one. It's very decorative.
They wanted to raise £20,000 that artist face mask initiative, the CAS, and they raised £100,000. People want to buy artist face masks, I guess. But it's a weird thing. It's just, yeah. I mean,
I suppose last year it was they wanted to buy artist skateboards, and now they're buying artist face masks.
That's right, isn't it? Significant anonymous attendee. A significant proportion of visitors to public museums and galleries in the age group that is shielding, not to mention those with pre-existing conditions from all ages. Do you think that it is ethical to reopen and gather over art when so many people will continue to be vulnerable and excluded unless a vaccine is available?
Yeah, I don't know about that. I mean, I'm nervous about that. I think that it will be difficult. I don't know. Sorry, that's a good question, and I don't know the answer. I'm not a medical person. I mean, also, like, what I realise is I'm full of all sorts of contradictions as well. Like, you know, we, unfortunately, I don't want to mention Dominic Cummings, but you know, like it's very much symptomatic of people not really knowing what they should or what they're supposed to do, and that you know, human rights or rights of freedom or freedom of information, you know, freedom of movement, you know, all these things are kind of like, they're all confused in this situation at the moment. At the moment, I think everyone's just holding their breath, you know, sort of trying to figure out, like, at what point it's safe to breathe out again.
Well, we don't trust the advice we're being given, do we? Particularly not in the view of recent developments. I mean, it's very problematic when the science isn't there and the facts are being bent and twisted to whatever agenda is present. Yeah, it is problematic, I think, and I think it will restrict. Okay, so yeah, we're somewhat flummoxed. We're somewhat flummoxed on the ethics of that one. Okay, so what do you suggest, Gavin? Says Kirari McCormack. This question is for Gavin. What do you suggest for an artist who's struggling with confined space without the luxury of having a studio close by, i.e. somebody who's got to work, you know, in a small corner of their flat?
Well, yeah, you've obviously got a computer, otherwise you wouldn't be on this chat. So the computer's going to be pretty helpful. It's papers and pencils, and just like, you just have to kind of get back to basics, I'm afraid. I would read. I would try and write up your strategy document. Try and just get some planning done, and I know it's really difficult to plan because it's a shifting game, but at the same time, if you start to do that, you will start to see certain things becoming clearer, and it will be helpful. But really, like, you don't need a huge, great big studio. I don't need a huge, great big studio either.
That's what I was just going to say.
I do love it. I'm very spoiled and lucky that I have got a dramatic, great big studio, but I don't need it.
I've just been saying, actually, what's interesting is, yes, you have got your great big studio and you have made great big artworks in it, but at the moment, the artworks that you're doing on an ongoing basis on a bit of A4 paper every day, with you doing these drawings, which actually you wouldn't even need to be in a studio to make. And I've spoken to quite a few artists, actually. Yes, they have the luxury of whopping great studios, but even someone like Anthony Gormley, who has a complete factory, is actually making works out of puddles of coffee. I mean, you could say yes, because he can, but you know, the fact is,
you should use tea. Tea is better than coffee, apparently. I
But it's
did.
Paul. But I mean, the fact is, if you want to make art, you can make art anywhere, anytime, any place. I guess it's a damn sight nicer if you've got lots of lovely space to mull around in. But making art is where you make it, I
I
suppose.
don't know if you saw the Julian Schnabel documentary, which I think he actually funded. He produced a documentary about his career, and there's some amazing scenes of him like in this outdoor place in Miami or wherever it was, with these huge canvases, sort of throwing. He just gets a rag and he dips it in paint and he just throws it on the canvas, and then he strides backwards, and then he stands and looks at the mark that the dirty rag made. It's absolutely amazing. I mean, it did make me want a huge, great big like outdoor studio space.
Well, that is the most kind of dick swingy of all art forms, Julian Schnabel, isn't it? In his dressing gown with the plates and the sun, the sun. I mean, it just does seem like a kind of dinosaur from a bygone era. Okay, so to bring us back to the here and now, says Ollie LP, how can smaller art spaces survive in the new normal? Good question. With difficulty, it seems, a lot of them.
Yeah, I mean, you were saying earlier on that some of the larger galleries are offering space to smaller galleries. I don't know, Periton Gallery, David Zwerner,
those are commercial galleries, yeah. I mean, I don't know whether he means public spaces or commercial spaces. I think both are going to find it hard. I mean, I think from a commercial point of view, it seems to me it's the middle tier of galleries that are going to really feel the problem. The ones whose artists, they're not complete, they're not running on a total shoestring. They've got a degree of, they've got secondary markets for some of their artists, but not really enough. They've been doing art fairs. They're struggling on a knife edge anyway in that big fat middle sector of the sandwich. These seem to be the commercial ones that are going to have the most problems.
I mean, those galleries have already been. Those galleries have kind of continually been suffering in the last little period, run up to now. It seems.
But the smaller spaces.
The very small spaces are quite tenacious, and they're made out of sheer kind of desire to do it. A bit like art, really. It's like they're just made out of the fact that people just want to do this thing. So there's a lot of
commercial. That's commercial art or artist-run selling spaces. I think you're right. I mean, I think everyone's struggling, and that's a given. But they probably will survive because they're running on such small resources. But the smaller public art spaces, I think that is a problem, because if they're relying on funding, they're already operating on very slender means. They don't have the revenue streams of cafes and gift shops and big backers and all that. And they do. I mean, the Arts Council have got the emergency funding, but the ones that relied perhaps on philanthropy, on donors, I think that's going to be together with public funding. That is going to be problematic. Everyone's got to get very entrepreneurial, which is very hard when you're in a shrinking economy.
Especially our one as well, because I think like the move away from Europe is going to make that even more difficult. And
the fact,
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think it will be difficult. I don't think there's.
It's going to be a struggle, but I think it will. But on the other hand, what does seem to have come out of all this, and the new normal, with this expression that we've made our tagline, is an increase in relationships. It's an increase in communication, relationships, partnerships. It seems to me like in this. I watched this a discussion between gallery directors, Brooklyn Museum. Spaces in Beijing, across Zoe Whitely from the Chisenhale, saying that actually, more and more gallery directors of institutions with similar kind of similar size, similar kind of financial backing, will be forming more and more relationships, more and more partnerships. And I think that extends also into the commercial sector. I flagged it up before, that more and more galleries, yes, big galleries are helping little ones, but also there is a team spirit across the sector, which I think is quite surprising and kind of cheering, actually. And I think that those kind of relationships, and we know the art world runs on relationships anyway, I think that might be a glimmer of hope for smaller spaces, but it will be hard. Do you have any advice, says Stephen Hughes, for students who should be presenting their degree shows this Saturday? God, that's a tragedy, isn't it? I mean, all these degree shows across the country not happening, all these artists who've been working flat out to
I
produce
don't know.
shows.
Yeah, no.
I mean,
I'm
some have gone online. Some, I mean, again,
sorry.
the dreaded online, but it's to be inventive to putting them online. It's to try and make some kind of
I mean, you know, like in terms of the exhibition, you know, is it possible that the exhibition could be postponed and be put on later? I know it doesn't fit in with the college, with the college's calendar, but maybe in terms of an exhibition, you know, is it possible that they could do it later? I don't know. I mean, it might be that the college has to find another space for them somewhere else, and I mean, I don't know. I'm sorry. I mean, it was very interesting when I was working at Bath Spa University. They used to have their degree show in Bath, and then they also used to afterwards. They rented a space. The students did it themselves. They rented a space in Brick Lane, and then put on another show in Brick Lane. So it was really amazing that they were actually like taking their work and then actually putting on an exhibition of their work, just organized by themselves. So I suppose there's an element of that. I mean, maybe you know, if the student body can keep together, if they can keep talking and keep their interest high, you know, when this all finishes, there might be some empty buildings which people can use and put a show up in the building. And maybe there's a process whereby you can like let people in like bit by bit, and you know, and
when you say this all, when you say this all finishes, you mean lockdown finishes to an extent?
yeah,
Because I mean, you know, it ain't going to finish. I mean, this is again, we were talking about the new normal and the new future, and I think, you know, it is something that we need to, it does. That was what I was talking about, being concerned about, you know, power grabs, that
yeah,
the fact that, you know, we could be, but I think if there's a sense of, if more people are allowed to see things, but more people are allowed to view, but there is going to be a whole knock-on effect across art education and across you know, student intake. I have a son who's beginning a foundation this autumn.
yeah.
How will that manifest itself? Doing it online. Back to the analog.
Yeah, well, I mean, this whole school system's gone totally crazy. I mean, like, you know, like people are not doing their A levels, not doing their O levels. You know, like they're trying to do classes online, homeschooling. I mean, it's chaos in the education department. Has just become really chaotic. I mean, it was already kind of it was already slightly suffering from the fact that it wasn't quite fit for purpose. Like people were going to art college and not necessarily learning or getting the right kind of experience. But maybe this is a whole different subject. But you know, like,
sorry, go.
no, you know, I'm starting to get off onto a whole different kind of train of thought here. But you know, that it's been very catastrophic, really, for what's happened in education. And yeah, we'll see.
Well, again, it's the thing I was saying before about crises foregrounding existing problems. Again, you know, the whole kind of art education system was really problematic. And I guess, again, there have been some interesting initiatives, like artists doing tutorial. Ryan Gander, I know, started, you know, offering his services and those of fellow artists to do crits for people who can apply. There's that whole isolation art school that's kind of sprung up as well, with a whole raft of different stuff. I'm not saying they're a substitute for art schools. They're also, before then, Open School East, Turk's Banana School. There were all kinds of other initiatives to provide kind of alternative models. Maybe the artists who won't have a chance to have their degree shows this Saturday will, you know, at least, if they can't have their degree show at some point in the future, maybe they will combine to make and look to the future for a better model of art education, which is more artist run, by artists, for artists, you know, because it seems to me that the current art school system has just become so bureaucratized, commercialized, so much about money and revenue, with you know, lecturers striking in inadequate pension plans. I mean, it's all just, you know, no respect really for the core learning learning values that should be at their centre. Anyway, I'm ranting now too. So.
No, but also could they put their could they put their degree show on a show reel and send it round and make an exhibition like with their, like almost like make a festival, a kind of online content festival with the, I mean, I know that obviously some people will have made objects, but you know, as best as possible, if they can find a way of filming around their objects and kind of exposing and defining their objects in certain ways, just almost like as a holding page, just to kind of like to get stuff out there and to try and find an audience and communicate with each other really about what they're doing and their interests and where they've taken their work to.
I'm being creative. I know one year, I think it was a little while back, you know, when they couldn't have their degree show, had set up a radio station and had all kind of performative aspects. It was oral rather than visual. I mean, it depends obviously on the nature of the course and the nature of the work, but certainly, you know, I think it's something to consider. Katie said, do you think this period of isolation will give artists more control over access to their work, as people seem to be going directly to artists? I mean, we've sort of talked about that a bit, but I think, yes, I think that seems to be the case already, that artists can post their work directly on Instagram. The trouble is, it's to make yourself stand out from the now deluge of online images. I mean, this is the whole problem, isn't it, with the whole migration to the internet. That's again, Anne Passanat from Brooklyn Museum was talking about this, saying that, you know, you have to keep changing your format, you have to keep changing your modus operandi. I mean, to begin with, everyone was having conferences. We're having a conference now, but Anne was having a whole program of talks for Brooklyn, and she just chucked it when she saw that everybody else was doing that too. You know, it's difficult. In a way you can present your work to a wider audience, or indeed your voice, but on the other hand, you do get drowned out in the crowd as well, don't you? It's a tricky.
No, I mean, already I suppose like we were getting to the point like where exhibitions, in order for an exhibition to be kind of, to have larger audiences and to have kind of effective program, like you'd have to have events. So you literally, like, you would end up like once a week you'd have someone coming in giving a talk, or you'd have re-engagement events that would take place during an exhibition. It wasn't just a private view and then the exhibition's open and it runs. It actually like had a series of education programs and various things that sprung up and worked around that exhibition. So, I mean, it's almost the same sort of thing, what you're saying, like how you represent yourself online. You know, you have to kind of keep kind of reinventing yourself. I mean, I remember trying to look at, there's the Saatchi gallery online. At one point, like, there was something like 10,000 artists who had all uploaded and were using the Saatchi site as their kind of portfolio. But it was, and I think originally the idea was that it was a sales site, that this was somewhere where people could go put their work and then they could sell their work from there. But it was impossible to find anything, just simply because there was so much. I mean, there was like over 1 million images on there.
Yeah, exactly. It gets overwhelming. Claire Laurie, hello Claire. Art schools charge £10,000 a year. Do you think they could continue to be valued as online institutions? I mean, you know, it's a lot of money, isn't it? When you're just doing Zoom seminars and webinars, it strikes me as being very problematic. That.
I mean, I don't know. Again, it's not my place, but my experience of college was I really enjoyed the physicality of it, and I really enjoyed the other students that I was in contact with, my peer group.
It's crucial.
It was the conversation between the peer group, and it was looking at their and being part of their mistakes and me making mistakes and them be part of my mistakes. That was the really learning experience. I think the interaction with the staff was kind of, to be honest, it wasn't really that good. I'm sorry, those members of staff. I mean, some excluded, but you know, occasionally someone would come in and it would be a wonderful thing. But so really, it's you know, like certainly on a further education, on a BA, MA, fine art course, is not so driven necessarily by the tutors. Certainly in the UK. I mean, obviously, if you're in Germany, like it is quite professorial. That's the way it's come and been in the UK. But like for me, it worked quite well like that. I enjoyed that process. I enjoyed that way of doing it. But again, I must say that I was fortunate to be I think the last year where I didn't have to pay. So,
yeah.
I'm in a different, I'm already in a different place. And I think that when you're paying for something, you do have to kind of go, well, what am I getting for my money?
Yeah.
If you're just getting for your money, sitting in a space with a lot of other people who are all saying, what am I getting for my money? This is a pretty boring conversation, and you're not going to have that nice frisson exchange with your peer group. So again, you need your tutors to be there. We're all in the same boat, and maybe it means that it'll be fine to go to some really good, like, one-to-one staff relations, meetings with tutors and stuff, and maybe have a tutor come online and see around your studio or around your room and see your work and have you explain it. Maybe that'll be okay, and maybe there will be lots of learning being done like that, and maybe that would work. And maybe there are points of reference, there are things that the tutor or the professor can point you towards. They can enlighten you on certain things. They can listen to the way you're talking and thinking about your art, and they can.
Yeah, but that's no substitute for I think, as you say, for the whole kind of social networks and the kind of interface that you have with your fellow students as well. I mean,
Sure.
it shouldn't be either or, it should be both. Yeah. So I think too much. Nasser Azim says that you're a social art, as I mentioned at the first. Nasser Azam says, as I mentioned at the start, you're a social artist. In the lockdown, you've had the opportunity to adapt and use social media as a vehicle to continue with your art. Given that you studied a lot of modern artists, how do you think artists 100 years ago would have dealt with the situation? Braque, Picasso, Modigliani, pick your artist. They were also highly social artists, but no, obviously not with the same access to these kind of social technology. How do you think artists of the past would have dealt with?
I think Picasso would have just been brilliant. He'd have just drawn on the screen, and he'd have just turned the whole thing into an art without any difficulty.
Salvador Dali would have been a slouch.
Salvador Dali would have just done some amazing, sophisticated
selfies, great selfies.
He'd done some sophisticated kind of like chat rooms, private addresses. Yeah, I think that I think the historical like surrealist Dada artists, I think they'd have thrived on it. To be honest, I think it's incredible. Like, if you think about the Dada moment where they just went like, let's just throw caution to the wind in relationship to the market, in relationship to art, in relationship to culture. Let's not try and sort of like make anything that makes narrative sense. Let's just speak in bubbles. Let's just let's go blah, 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 and that's art. And that's great, and they'd be wonderful at this.
I think Marcel Duchamp would have been brilliant. The alter egos that he could have produced online would have been extraordinary.
Yeah, it would suit him to a T, I think.
Says Julie Lane, the new normal seems like an artist needs to be both head cook and bottle washer. At what point, Gavin, do you just press the off switch and just create? Maybe you create while you're washing bottles and cooking.
The bottle washer? It's a bottle rack, I think.
So I don't
know. There isn't. This is the thing. There isn't really a button, and it's annoying because I'd love it if there was a button. Sometimes I really don't feel like it, and then other times I'm sort of struck by it. And so, I used to work when I first sort of left art college. I used to work in a really kind of irritating way where I'd have an idea and I'd just kind of stay making it and doing it until it was finished, and then I'd go to bed for a few days. Whereas now, like, I've kind of learned to have a bit more of a routine. I get up in the morning and brush my teeth and stuff like that. So I've kind of curtailed the on-off button a little, or I have an on-off button a bit, but it's not, in terms of good times and bad times. You don't really know it. Like that, some days it's easy. You throw something like across the room and it goes straight in the bin. And other days it's never going to go in the bin.
Couple more questions. I'm aware that we've gone over time now. It's 7:10, but Anne Stansfield says, Gavin, could you say a little bit more about the automatic drawings? You've referred to them a few times. They've popped up in the conversation. Could you say a bit more about the automatic drawing and just having pencil and paper in hand? Where's this led you? Has it led you to some interesting places? Has it taken you? I've looked at the drawings. They're very various. That's what I think.
They're really varied, and they're really varied. And you go through periods where they're quite annoying, where you don't really like them. But I think because you just have this contract that you just start off and you're just going to do something, and then sometimes it just goes weird and goes a bit wrong, and then you have to try and fix it. I'm enjoying it. It's funny because I slightly made a kind of a rod for my own back. Like, the idea was that they're not really supposed to look like anything, whatever that means. And so it sort of starts off and immediately you put one line down, like going boom, and then you're like, oh God, like, oh, so now, and the rest of it almost is like just trying to kind of correct or kind of make something out of that one line. So they kind of almost make themselves. I try not to think too hard about it. I try to if ever I start thinking, I should do it like this, I have to go, hang on a minute, and I kind of try and do it like that. So sometimes it really is like, yeah, it's just an avoidance.
Are they specifically locked down? Is it a series you're just going to do under lockdown when we are allowed out?
When I'm allowed, yeah, but as you said, when am I going to be allowed out? No one's going to let me out again. I'm just going to change.
You're allowed out a bit more, but when do you see an end in sight, or will you just end when you decide you want to finish doing them?
I do. I'm going to keep going. I think I'm quite enjoying it. I mean, I've got to confess. I say it's a drawing a day. Every now and again, I miss a day, and then I have to do two. But okay. I cheat, and I say that I did one each day.
So there was one question from here, which was sorry, it's just now. I'm scrolling back again. Selena Ogi says, this is going to be almost out. I've got one more quick question after this, but Selena Ogi says, you each hold an important voice in the art world. Well, you do. I'm not so sure about me. What do you hope the new normal to be? And also, what is normal? Well, I'm going to very quickly say that who knows what's normal. Normal is just what you're doing at the moment. I think normal is just where you are. But my hope for the new normal is, I'm going to paraphrase the Culture Declares a climate emergency New York artists, where they talk about being committed to a shift from a production paradigm of extraction and competition to one of regeneration, reciprocity and circularity. So I hope the new normal will become something that's more sustainable and maintainable, and not about expansion, profit and competition. I think it's highly unlikely that will happen overnight, but I hope that we can at least aim towards something more sustainable and maintainable. It's not about expansion and competition. That's what I hope the new normal will be.
I like that. I'll go for all that. That sounded good.
You'll go for that?
I mean, the whole kind of concept of normal is quite a challenge anyway. I mean, it's almost like something you don't want, it's almost like an insult. It's like when something becomes normal or normalized, like it loses energy. It becomes kind of it all becomes dissipated. I mean, I hope that the new normal is it's just that we can be that we're able to be free to be intelligent, and that we can continue to be intelligent, and hopefully, you know, as Louisa was saying, I hope that, you know, that there's that we move into just a bit more of a better place in terms of representation, freedoms, the environment, sustainability, ecology. My daughter is doing. This is before we finish, I'll just do a little quick plug for her thing. She is living in Amsterdam, locked down in Amsterdam, and she has a small collective of ecologists, and they have started they've started a community online called Re-Peat, P-E-A-T, and on the 31st of May, they've got Peat Fest. And so Peat Fest is their own creation, where they've gone around all over the world. They've got people from New Zealand, people from South America. They've got a 24-hour peat-based festival with every hour someone doing a different thing, doing a workshop or a talk or all sorts of things. So
peat-based workshops.
Peat-based.
Global peat.
It's basically like learning and understanding and getting together with people who want to protect peat, because it's the European. It's the European rainforest, basically. It's a very, very special piece of ground, which at the moment is currently under threat because the Common Agricultural Policy want to give grants to farmers to dry peat areas and to mine peat for agriculture and for whatever else they do, for fire, for burning, and basically we need to protect the peat.
Last question, lovely Vanessa Frister from Stromsholm Island. Gavin, have you bleached one side of your moustache or tinted the other side brown?
No, it's grey. It's just gone grey on one side.
So there's been no adjustment to the moustache at all?
No.
Okay, well, on that elevated...
Normal. We'll put the Peat Fest information in somewhere. I don't know.
Okay, the new normal moustache and the Peat Fest will be...
Yeah, this is the new normal moustache.
This is our parting thrust. Well, thank you very much, Gavin. That was fantastic.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for all your questions.
Namaste.
Namaste. See you on the other side in the new normal. Bye-bye. Bye, Gavin.